Hey, Tony, can you hear me? Brian, can you hear me? Hello? Hello? Hey, Brian.
What's up, buddy?
Yeah. Hey, Tony. Do you have a mic on your computer, Tony? Do you have a mic on your computer? Okay. Oh, yeah, you can do that. There should be a little number there you can call into. Okay, no problem. All right, bye-bye. How you doing, Brian?
Oh, pretty good. How about you?
Good. Tony's 69, and I'm trying to get him to help him to figure out technology.
Oh man.
He's gonna call in. He didn't have a mic on his computer,
Oh, okay.
so he's
So
gonna
Christina
call.
this morning?
I gave Christina the day off. She's in Nantucket with her family,
Oh,
so
okay.
I said, "You take the day off and go to the beach, and I will run this call."
Oh, cool.
Yeah. How you doing?
Just been a busy week, but a rough week, but we'll get through it.
Yeah. How's Desiree doing?
It's tough. She's had Poncho I know she's had her for, let's see, probably 11, 12 years.
Yeah, that's tough.
And so, it's a tough gig, and it's one of those things where he was fine the morning we left, and then came home from work and he wasn't doing well and thought maybe he had a seizure or stroke, and then ended up taking him to the emergency vet, and he had a tumor in his stomach that had ruptured, and so he was just bleeding out.
Oh,
And so it was one of those things where, he was an older guy and he was losing his hearing and losing, some of his sight. But at the same time, it was just not expected. And he was fine that morning and then gone that night. And so, and it was just sad because, we wanted to bring him home, but he literally, all the blood was pooling in his stomach. And so he couldn't oxygenate his blood. And so he was just gasping for air.
oh.
Greetings, I'm here, finally.
Hey, Tony.
Hi, Dane.
How are you?
Just great. Sorry about the audio and visual well, the visual's here. Thank God for that.
Yeah, and if you want to share,
I'll get better next time.
Yeah, there's a little button in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, and it says share video. So you could share your handsome face if you want. It's not necessary, but if you have a camera on your laptop or your computer, it would share. But if you don't, then we'll just have to listen to your beautiful voice.
Doesn't make any difference anyway. I've pushed in shared screen, but that's not working too, right?
Yeah, I can see your screen now. But if you want, there's.
Can you see me?
I can't see you. There's a little video in the lower left. So the share screen, you can basically stop sharing your screen because I'm going to share that graphic that you gave me.
All right.
So just go back where you hit the shared screen and just hit stop. It should be at the top. It should be a little button.
I'm just trying to get you back up at the moment, pal. I apologize. This is one of those things where I should have tested with you before we started here, Dane. My apology.
No worries. No worries. Continue. I'm going to share my screen.
Okay, here we go.
All right. So Brian, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Let me find that call. All right. So let me pull up the resource that you sent me. And Brian, can you see that?
Yep. Closed
I can
loop
see that.
management system.
All right, good. So we should be good to go with this, Tony. And with this, we'll get started. And the call's being recorded.
Okay.
A lot of the doctors that will listen to this will probably listen to it at a later date because most doctors have hours on Friday mornings. So I just want to welcome our guest, and I'm really excited for you guys to learn the wisdom of this man. I've been working with him for the past 3 months, and originally had Tony on a coaching call that we did with Kathy Baumgardner. Probably, I would guess it's about a year now, maybe 8 months, and was really impressed with him. I reached out to him, and it was at a time where our practice was in transition with Dr. Denise leaving. And, you know, Dr. Denise ran a lot of the functions in the practice, and, you know, it was difficult for me personally not to be as involved, which I'm learning was not a good thing. And I'm just very transparent. You know, I try to be transparent as a leader. And I learned a really valuable lesson, and that is if you're not involved with the business, and that doesn't mean that you have to, you know, manage every role, and that doesn't mean that you have to do every responsibility in the clinic, but you certainly have to have a really good pulse of what's going on business-wise in the practice. So I felt like Tony was a guy that could help us, Dr. Jerry and myself, who's my partner, get on the same page and really start to look at our practice as a business and start to really put in some strategies and more structure into our business. And it's just been a wonderful experience for me. And I would dare say for Dr. Jerry as well, meeting Tony. And Tony, I think it's been a wonderful experience for you because we were able to help you with your health.
That's right. That's right. My story is I came in after, what was the second time I met with you. And I had been gaining weight rapidly during the past year, and I'd gained 35 pounds, and I was popping Nexium like it was candy every day without following the instructions. And lo and behold, I had a little dream that said Nexium and weight gain, and I did a search about 4 pages back on it. I found all these articles on weight gain and Nexium if you don't follow the instructions. And sure enough, 20 to 40 pounds is an average weight gain if you don't follow the instructions. And so I stopped, and I was talking to Dane about that, Dr. Dane about that, and he said, "Well, Tony," he says, "what are you doing now?" I said, "Nothing, I'm just suffering." He said, "Well, let me help you." I said, "Well, sure." And he gave me a was it Ultra GI? Is that what that was? I can't remember what the name was. And I took that for the month that the bag of shakes lasted morning and night. And since that point, I have not had any heartburn, any more scarring in my esophagus. I've been healthy. I've lost 25 pounds, back in the gym, feel young again, actually. So it just changed my life completely. I personally believe that how many people do you see that don't say a word to you? I was chatting with Dane, and suddenly my life was changed. So I'm a convert. Of course, my whole life I've been with alternative medicine, including my brother, who's a neurocranial osteopath. So it's we've all not seen regular MDs all our lives as kids and as an adult, and we've been to chiropractors for adjustments, especially during athletic times. But I'm anxious actually to try the 8 weeks to wellness right now. So I want to see how that's going to make a second difference in my life.
Awesome.
Thank you, Dane.
I really believe that the best relationships are mutually beneficial, and this certainly has been. So, Tony, I want to give everybody maybe a taste of your expertise, because I don't think the listeners know what I know because I've been working with you, and just know the wisdom. And you said something yesterday when we met, Tony, that I really believe strongly. And you said every meeting that you have with a professional, it doesn't matter whether it's a dentist or a chiropractor or an accountant or a business coach or consultant, you should walk away from that meeting having learned something. And that really stuck with me yesterday because I believe that to be true. And I really want people to walk away from this experience having learned something that hopefully they can put into practice or kind of follow up on. So maybe could you just start with a little bit of your background and what led you to where you are and why, why you are an expert? Because I think if people understand your path and where you came from and what led you to here, they'll understand, why you are an expert in helping, organizations get on track as far as their business.
Well, thank you. My background is that I was for 17 years CPA, 10 years as a senior partner in a regional firm in the East Coast. And I left the firm I was doing work overseas for the firm in negotiations of acquisitions of our clients or clients' purchasing companies, and got noticed by a publicly traded company in one of the deals I was doing out there, and got a chance to be the U.S. CEO of a London, New York Exchange company. And that took me I left the firm for two reasons. One was a dream, and number two, as a CPA, I would do great analysis and talk about problems, but never really was there to fix them and not with people to fix them. So when I went out to the corporate world, this company had 13 companies in the U.S., and one was a problem. And I said, go fix it. And I had no idea what the company did. I had no idea what the even what they did meant, quite frankly. And went out there, and they wanted it done in 30 days. And I went out there and learned something I'd learned over my 17 years in public accounting: humility and asking questions works. And so out of that, it got fixed. I got confidence in that and went on to, from there, when they were acquired, I went on to another national healthcare company and for a build and sell. And then couldn't find the next job after that build and sell was over, so went to a national consulting firm, and in 2 years, I became the the managing partner, the managing director of the firm for another 13 years. And then I went back to private practice of my own. And what I learned is that there's synergy in all companies. I've seen every industry. Some people think I'm an expert in healthcare. Some people think I'm an expert in construction. Some people think I'm an expert in manufacturing. The truth is, I'm not an expert in any of them like you are of your own businesses. What I do is ask a lot of questions, and through a mindset that we'll go through today of what's the structure of the organization that's going to support where they want to go, the person who owns the company or the board of directors that's directing the company, and how can I help them get there faster? How can I heal them in areas where they have problems? And I've worked with both publicly traded companies and privately held companies, very small companies and very large companies.
So my first question is, I guess, for me, coaching chiropractors for years, I think the biggest problem, and I would love to know your perspective, Tony, when you walk into an organization to help them, what you see as the number one thing that needs to be fixed or corrected. But from my perspective, when I look at a chiropractor's business, I think the biggest problem that I see is they're just not engaged in it. So you can't change something you're not aware of. I always say that you can't change something you're not aware of. So when you're not engaged, you're not aware of the problems that are becoming more and more, insidious in terms of destroying your business. So I'm just curious about your perspective of what you see.
Well, typically when someone's engaging me, they're in pain. There's a problem. And so therefore, they're at least interested in, hopefully this is going to be the fix that they've been looking for to sit down and talk with me. So the client is always engaged in the early conversation. The question always is, can this client stay engaged in the fix? And that's what you'll notice in what we're doing right now, is to establish accountabilities in practice for the top people where there weren't specific accountabilities for them previously, to get them engaged, force them to be engaged in the process and have an ownership of the process. Because at the end of the day, unless they want to keep on spending an awful lot of money, you want this guy, Tony, out of there as quickly as possible and let me go run my practice and make a lot of money now for a change. And so the biggest issue is, is the ownership willing to make changes there, or are they going to get in the way of the changes? Is the ownership going to be honest and engaged in the process. And those are the two biggest issues, and they generally get resolved or I don't engage.
Wow.
And I think you had the same experience. I had the same conversation with your people,
Yeah.
with you and with Jerry.
Yeah, and I think we see the same thing when people come to us with 8 weeks to wellness, Tony. They rarely come because they're already fit and healthy and they're doing a great job. They're usually in pain or crisis, and they need that coaching and accountability. So it's somewhat similar. So, where I'd like to go from here, I'm going to share my screen again. And let me pull up the document that we were just discussing. And because I know this document seems very involved. So when you first look at it, you see all the arrows going all over the place and you see all the different boxes, but maybe you can help us make sense of this, or if there's something else that you think that needs to, go first prior to this and explaining this, I'll let you do that. But I'm going to kind of let you take the show here and really go through this so we have a good understanding of the structure.
Thank you. Generally, this is specifically in the shape it's in right now, is an analytical process to determine what an accountable, achievable plan of revenue and profitability while maintaining the culture of a business, how to build it. And so in every client that any good analyst or consultant will go into, they do something like this. And this simply says that I need to identify walking in who works there and what the culture desired in the practice, or what they feel the culture of the practice is right now, both. So that if you look at the items called people and assets and management method, those are simply items called strategic resources in any business. And they're the same for every business. People that work in the business and the culture or attitude you want in your practice, that would be the first one I'll be looking at. The next thing is the condition of the office, the layout of the office, the equipment they use, the profit centers they have, those types of things. I just want to see how they intend to make money and what the support structures are of that profit plan. And then the last thing is what's unique about that. Management method is really the from where someone comes. So you can see in Dane, he's come from a sense of wellness, and he comes from a background of medicine. So that's that uniqueness of the business. And every business has it. It's usually in the founder somewhere. It grows up with generations to generations of something maybe varying from that. But you want to identify what that culture is. And that's simply the basics of any business. And I identify them in interview. And as Dane would probably recall, that the first time I started with management, and I started with the key people there, your office manager, you and Jerry, in a meeting outside. I then came in and did interviews with all of your people that were key to the organization in private, confidential interviews to learn what they thought and what they, from their perspective, and learn about how they thought, what was critical about their jobs. I compare that to what you had as far as information in the office too. And then lastly, I got a nice tour of the office and got to see how it's laid out and understand the flow of the space of the office. So those are analytical identification of the strategic resource you're going to war with to run a business every day. And then I'm interested in how well or poorly you utilize them.
For a sec, Tony. If I could just stop.
I'm here.
Yeah, if I could just stop you for a second. I think, what you just said, I just don't want it to just gloss over people, but, I let alone, bringing an outside consultant in to do that. I don't think most chiropractors are doing that in their own businesses, to really take a look at their culture and sit down with their people and really look at their assets and look at what their unique skills are. So, I think, and maybe it's the same with health, is that people need that accountability to really take a look. But I think that's super important. Thank you.
And so if you don't know what you're looking at, and therefore you're now asking questions, or I'm asking questions, so I get a sense of knowledge to have a rational conversation with my client. I then begin to look at that in the sense of how you use them, in sense of productivity and efficiency in the business. So the first thing I'm going to go to is what is the organizational structure of the company today, and I'm looking at, and as the consultant side of my life, saying, and what is that they're currently doing, and can it be better in just like experience and common sense? So I'll ask questions around that too. So I'll go down what the different profit centers or departments are, what the chain of communications or command is, who's in charge of what, how do they communicate. I want to see what their defined critical standards of jobs are, what the business plan looks like, even if they don't have a formal business plan. Where are you going? How do you intend to get there? What kind of revenue? And I'll begin to analyze the revenue sources down by doctor, down by profit center, and I'll begin a financial analysis at that point. I'm going to see how they staff. So allocation and placement of people and when, that's staffing side. And what's the concept behind that? And I'm going to look at that from the standpoint of proficiency or efficiency, and also from the standpoint of does it make sense financially. In this process, which we're about to start over at Dr. Dane's office, is I'm going to put together a functional organization. So I'm going to create the boxes of all the people and what they do and what's critical about what they do. And by the way, when I use the term critical, what someone does, it means not everything that is in their job description, but those things that are so critical to the practice that we have to measure them. And we have to measure them easily, and we have to use that information. So anything that's critical in the way of a process that someone has to do that is measurable and it's critical, then we're going to make sure that item is going to be highlighted in the absolute down and dirty duties of that person's job. So now I'm not looking at names of people in the practice. I've moved all the people into an inventory account, so to speak, and I'm now defining, based on where we want to go and based on my knowledge of the practice, what should be critical in those position titles and how much should we pay them and what kind of incentive plan should we have if we want to try and retain A-level employees. And the process of that is probably the most significant process in the practice, because the next step of it is, let's see who you currently have hired and are working there that actually fit into those boxes completely. And we'll fill those in with names at that point. The ones that are still blank, we'll look and see, are there people that we need to train and we want to keep and we're able to train them in order to be in that position. And that's the next group that goes in. And if all the boxes are filled, we're happy. And if all the boxes aren't filled, it tells us that over a period of time, we really need to probably make changes in those boxes. And so that would be the next step of that organizational implementation. Before you do anything in any business, you want to test things. So when you define the business plan, you define where you're going, how you're going to get there. The next thing is to test the concepts that you have to make sure they're not going to blow up in your face. We have marketing concepts. We have practice concepts. So the concept here is to teach them how to test anything before they fully implement it. One of the problems that came out of the practice, or discussions, I should say, is that there were a lot of new procedures, new things coming into the practice, sometimes in rapid succession, and the staff was starting to feel as if they were off balance. So they're getting too much information, too much change at one time. And what it meant was that it wasn't well communicated, number one, which is something that needs to be done there. And therefore, it's well communicated. Maybe that was all that was needed to happen. Or maybe sometimes it really was too rapid, and you really want to test that and see if it really does do the trick that you're trying to accomplish. So that'll be another step we'll take on that. That's operations process where we're testing in the execution of that plan. And there, we want to see how they want. This is information now. We're capturing information that we've defined. The defined information in the practice is common sense. I mean, you want to know what you're generating in revenue, what your contractual allowances are, hopefully by type of contractual allowance or discount that you may offer or coupon that you may offer, and start to track productivity and where we should be emphasizing our practice in areas that are most profitable, that patients tend to use at a higher level, and go after that revenue. So this is just you creating information out of the activities and using it. And this, frankly, in every business I see, is probably the biggest problem. They don't look at the critical information or know how to use it. And the information oftentimes isn't an easy form. It's not an easy form to use. So those are pretty easy things to fix, and that's one of the things we're addressing in Dane's practice right now.
Yeah, I mean,
systems of reporting.
Yeah, this.
Go ahead, Dane.
Let's stop on that for just a second. I just got done reading a book called Measure What Matters, and I've been communicating with the doctors about this concept of OKRs, of the objectives, which are the critical items that you discussed. And then, the KR part of it is the key results that, should support the overall objective or mission of the business. And I think you really hit the nail on the head, at least for our practice, is, you not only need to know the key metrics, but you need to know how to collect the most accurate data from your systems. And, that's one thing that we could do a much better job at with ChiroTouch and some of our systems is, collecting the data so that we can mine it and use it properly, so that we can then use that data to say, okay, now what do we do with this data? Because, garbage in, garbage out, if you don't have the data or the data is incorrect, then you're making false assumptions.
That's right. And so anyway, at this point, in gathering data, it sets up the last piece. And many times I go into a business and they talk about accountability. And accountability is, in easy terms, is knowing what the impact of what you're about to do is on your customer, on revenue, on profitability, on the employees in your company or the different departments in your company, and the impact on your compliance or regulatory side of your business. So accountability is, in this case, is if we've told our employees what it is critical that they need to do, and that we're going to measure them to give them objective information, and probably tie that to the compensation some way, is that we want them to be able to recognize the good behaviors that we have described in our business plan, what's critical to us. So the trick here is that the employees then, if they've been trained well, they're able to recognize when they've done a good job. We reinforce that by saying good job, or giving them information or incentives that say, hey, do it again. So the employee, generally a good employee, will always want to do a good job over and over and over again. The problem is, oftentimes we're not clear what good is. And therefore, good employees then go and make up their minds about, they think they're doing the best thing for them, the company. And now you have maybe 10 or 15 or 20 employees or 5 employees that are out there doing good, but they're doing their good and not the good that we need to make a practice operate profitably, drive revenue, have patients come back, have the perfect experience that we're trying to have with our patients in this particular case. So that's chaos. And that is something that in every business, if they don't have structure and accountability, and people can't recognize the good that you're selling in that practice, then you have loss of profitability constantly. And this is a major, major problem in every industry. It's that what's critical, can I measure it? Can I make objective communications with my employees where they can see whether they've done what we've asked them to do to the standards we've given them and they've accepted? Now, all this sounds like it's really complicated maybe to some people to talk about it, but in practice, it's a really straightforward thing. 90% of everyone you have training in practice probably acts accountably. It's that 10% or 20% or 5% that we're really going after that changes the practice. It's the force du jour, putting everyone on the same page and stop having gossipy stories about what doesn't work in the practice or what they don't like, that puts them back in focus to actually move a company forward, including a chiropractic practice. So in this one, the importance of this for us is for 3 reasons. Is one, it establishes a practice of accountability, not only for the employees, but for the owners of the practice, the partners in the practice. If they see that the partners are willing in their roles within the organization to be held accountable, they get right on board real fast. The second thing is, if they recognize good, they'll repeat it. That's a concept of control. I recognize what I did well. I do it again because I'm a good employee or a good owner. And I also the owner wants to make more money for his practice, and the employee wants to hit incentives if they can meet those incentives. Then the last thing is, which is probably the more important third step of that, is they are able, if they know what good is, and they're able to recognize a potential problem or a changing condition and report it. So the response time to correct an operational problem or an organizational problem, the plan needs to change. Something's changed. We've had a gigantic recession on our hands. How do we fight that recession? We've had to change something in our location of a business moving in or moving out. How do we fight that change or modify our behaviors to fight that change? So it puts people on the same page of knowing what they need to do. And the main thing here is that don't make it complicated. Don't make it tons and tons of information. Only the information that's really critical are what people need in this. So my analogy is, if you go out, it's football season coming up, that's just the playbook, organization. It's the game. It's the positions and what they're supposed to do in those positions to run those plays. Operations is running the plays. So you might do it in practice. Do it again till you get it right. That's called implementation. That's called training. And then the last thing is keep score. And that, if you look at it, that is exactly what any professional or non-professional team does. They define the game that's going to be played. They run the plays via practice and actually meaningful games. So practice and your or training within your own practices becomes important. And then in the day-to-day operations, how do we know if that's really operating from what we planned? We keep score. We have reporting systems that are critical, and we review them. And we make sure that it's not a monumental task to review it. So it's something that's easy to read, easy to identify the problem. And if I want to drill back to deeper information, the drill back information is available to do that. And that's basically what's occurring. The fix on those is to really turn this thing upside down. So when it's fixed, instead of your resources being kind of a trickle down, I hope I make a profit by spending all that money on people and all the great equipment and that I have and the facility I have. And boy, we're a lot of smart people running that practice, and I've hired really smart people, and I think I try to train them. And then I hope at the end of the day, we have a good practice and patients come back and we make the money we want to make. And sometimes it doesn't work out that way. And that's typically where the problem is, that if you turn this up and you watch the bottom of that, it goes to plan. And the plan becomes the important piece of the puzzle. And then you're going to benchmark manpower or people. You're going to benchmark money. How do I make money in the practice? You're going to benchmark equipment or machine and how that's going to help the practice for efficiency or to generate revenue. And then I'm going to benchmark method. And I'm going to benchmark it. Method means in my practice, where do I want to take it? What do I want to accomplish? How do we know if we're getting to that point? And then we go back, if we benchmark those, meaning put standards to those, then we go and set up the organizational structure to support that plan, set up the operational process to support that plan and test it and practice, and make sure that we learn how to use the information feedback where critical. And then your base of your company at that point is all the money you spend. Instead of trickle down, it's actually empowering those strategic resources where you spend all your money, turn around and empower the company. And I've done this for 30 years now. And this is, I mean, you can call it anything you want to call it, but it is a closed loop, meaning it's those little boxes with the arrows. It means that if I put in the people, I organize the people and define what's critical, and in some way have the ability to tie it to the compensation. Whether I want to put an incentive plan or not, it's a different conversation. Do I have the ability with the people to test that they know what they're doing? So, and they say that's what they're responsible for and accountable for. Why is it really happening? So the line goes to operations. And then the line goes to systems reporting. Are they able to recognize good? Are they repeating good? Meaning, are we in control in that process? And do they have the ability to recognize problems and respond to those problems to the timeline and result required? And every item on there, as you'll see, goes back into people, organization, operations, systems reporting. We organize the equipment we have, the working capital we need in the business, all the things we need in the business financially and in equipment side and product side to make that work. And then we make sure that we organize management and the skills that they bring to the table, uniqueness of that practice, and we have an accountability around that. And that's what we're doing with Dane and Jerry right now. And that's pretty much it. I mean, so it's more understood. I was giving a speech yesterday in Philadelphia. I was giving a speech to 9 countries from Central America that the U.S. government invited in a program they're trying to do to build up businesses in Central America to reduce unwanted immigration to the United States, and by building those businesses so they can hire people down there and sell to the United States. And I told them before I started, they were people that were bilingual at some level, so we had to be careful of Spanish versus English. And I brought in a marketing person, and I brought in a international business development person, and myself, and we discussed closed loop. And both the marketing person came up there and, with not using the same terms, said the same factors as what she has to do in her company to make sure their marketing plans work. And then the person comes into business development, comes in there and speaks to it in a different language. So closed loop is a fundamental of business. If you can't do this, if you can't structure this and control this at a high level, if not, because there's no perfection. That's why there's that I have to respond to potential problems piece on this and to a timeline and result needed, is that it's just your practice won't work. It just won't work. And people who don't come in and do something like this are off base. You just don't hire them. And in that meeting, I said before we started, and this group of people I'd never worked with in my life. And so I'd never been up stage. I just invited because they're good. And we split the presentation, a 2.5-hour presentation. And I said before we started, I said, we have a responsibility to you today that you walk out of here and you're saying, wow, this was so much more than we expected. This is so fantastic. I said, that's going to be our benchmark today. So we're going to be interacting with you for the rest of the afternoon, and we're going to ask you for your response. And I'm proud to say that everyone, including the president of the organization that put this together and came back and said, wow, said this was the best presentation I've ever seen. And all we did was talk about closed loop in practical terms to their companies in one-on-one conversations. So Dane saw me go through something like this in a different structure. This is a general one that I have. But the practical side of this is that, yeah, everyone has strategic resources of people, equipment, working capital, material, inventory of some sort, and whatever they are, just they are. They're needed to run the business. Somebody has a unique idea to start the business. And so it's a pretty simple thing to identify those. And all we're really doing is using common sense to put in a structure and process that supports where they want to go, that supports the plan of revenue, that supports the plan of profit, because profit in these things I call minimum acceptable profit. Minimum acceptable profit in a plan has to be accomplished, not maybe. So we set up structures that are achievable, not pie in the sky, and we practice. And when people exceed expectations, I mean, they exceed their performance standards, we share the pie with them. But the pie is the pie over the minimum profit after the doctor gets paid what they're supposed to get paid, and after the minimum profit comes back, which is return on investment and return on risk. Then we share some of that with the employees. But first they have to learn how to make the minimum acceptable profit before they can share, as a summary. And it's common sense. And it's done day after day after day after day in every industry I've seen. I think I've seen every industry in the world.
Wow. Well, that was a lot.
I think.
And, I like I said, I love working on this. And one of the things that I thought of while you were speaking, and I would just like your feedback on this, and certainly if anybody else has any questions, please just type them into the chat box and I'll ask Tony. But one of my questions, Tony, in your experience in working with a lot of companies on this strategy, how much pushback do you get? So like, for example, when you define what's good in a role, right, in a position, let's say that employee that's been there for 10 years they've already defined in their mind what's good, and they've been practicing, even though it may not be good, they think it's good. Can you give us some tips on, how do you turn around an employee that you love, that you want to keep, but they just, they just don't know what good is, but they think they do?
Yeah, there's probably in the national firm, there's an metric that they kept stats on that. And as a general rule, 2/3 to 75% of the employees get on board, have the skills to do the job, or we wouldn't have them in that job under the structure that we've had there. So I'd say about 2/3, 75% typically are on board immediately, because everybody wants to see change if it's positive change. And as I said, if they can see the owners of the practice, the key people in the business behind this and actively involved in it, they're going to tend to want to move on, because that's what they're looking for, leadership. It's when the practice, as Dane began the conversation, are not involved. They get scared. They don't know what to do. And then when something goes, they see something wrong in the practice and it doesn't get fixed right away by ownership, or they delay on it, or they can't come to agreements to do things, that makes them scared. So when they typically see this process, one part of my job is to mobilize behavior. So when I'm doing the interviews, I'm really mobilizing that change is coming, that this change is really good, and I answer questions that they may have. And so one part of it is they've already been mobilized to expect it and want it. And then you have the next group. The next group is, yeah, I kind of want to believe, but, maybe I'll just watch on the sidelines for a while and, and then I'll get on board. I'll come along, but I'm not sure. And you don't want that. So the statement I make to them when that happens is just an easy analogy. We're all at the train station. This is a train to the Orient Express, and hop on. And they say, no, it's the trip to hell, because I can see how the tracks go one way at the fork and another way, and I think it might take that fork to hell. And we laugh and say, hey, you know what? You can run alongside if you want to. That's okay. And you try and get on, but just when you see which way the train's really headed. But you might fall by the wayside or not keep pace, and then you'll just not get on at all, and you'll probably be gone. And they get the analogy or a similar analogy, and get on. And we know some have reservations. There are groups, and in our firm nationally, we had about a 10% group that, boy, they just weren't going to do anything. And about half of those, you have a direct conversation with each one of those, and about half statistically would get on board. So it's about a 5% shrinkage and overall in the type of big corporate work that we were doing. In the smaller side, there's usually, if there's a poison pill in the practice, it's usually identified. I'll know that before I go into the process, talk to the owners of the practice beforehand, make sure that we make a decision on that person early on. I'll look to see if by asking questions, and I began a question on someone I thought may not have the whole package for the position, and maybe we need to build things around that person to make it work. Do you really want to keep that person? We'll have those kind of conversations beforehand. So I don't see a problem typically in the implementation. People are happy to see change that positively affects them. Understand, we're defining not only what's good for the practice, what's good for them too. Because employees at the end of the day want to be told nice things about themselves, but they also want to know how they make money in your practice. And every employee, no matter what they tell you, they're there to make money. And if you can't define for them how they're going to make money with all the things you're doing, then they're going to start to think, oh, well, all I do is work hard. Sure, I get a paycheck, but boy, I have nowhere to go. I haven't had a raise in God knows when. Nobody does formal reviews with me, and I don't like the raise, but I can't say anything because I can't leave. There's all kinds of things that go on with this, but that rarely becomes a problem, because that's what I call mobilization. Interviews are done. Let people know that the good things are coming and this is what's possible. So, for example, if you put in performance-based compensation, they have to become clear that the company has to be making its minimum acceptable profit first, and it has to be operating at full tilt. So they know that, and they work harder to get to that point, because it's a celebration when incentives come in. And the celebration for ownership is that they're making the money they're supposed to make in their payroll and in their bottom line, and they're happy to share some portion of that with their employees for exceeding their minimum acceptable standards of performance. That's my experience of it.
So my next question is, and we talked about this yesterday in our meeting, and dedication doesn't always mean that a person has the skill sets in the role or position that they're in. And
that's correct.
I would just maybe like you to elaborate on that. Like, how often do you see, an employee, they show up, their heart's in the right place, they understand the mission of the business, they're 100% on board, but then when you go to look at their job and their role, they simply just don't have the skill sets, whether that's training or whether that's just aptitude and natural ability for that position. How do you deal with that without upsetting the apple cart in terms of, the employee? Like, you want to keep them, you want to get them, as the analogy I always use, not just on the bus, but maybe move them from one seat to another that fits their skill set.
I'd say about 100% of the time, there's one person in a business that applies to. So I see it all the time. Typically, it'll be identified early on, a conversation before you start implementing. I'll get a sense of whether the a business for some reason wants to have that person in there, and find a method and explain what the method would look like to ownership, about how training would have to happen, and that person has to be clear that this is now part of that person's job, and over a period of time that's specific, that they have to learn and pick up these skills, and then we'll make that implementation at that point if that's what the business wants on those people. It's pretty straightforward. It rarely, on the other hand, I would say that sometimes in the functional organization, there's a position that doesn't exist in the business at that point, and maybe that person, and a few times it's happened, where the person that they might think they ought to terminate go the opposite way. I'll find a position for that person, and they'll be a star. I had a construction company up in the Gold Coast of New York and Connecticut that built, the big $25 million, $100 million homes in the Hamptons and in that Gold Coast area. And they were, and that's like a major construction company. And they had an employee as a project manager who was, and they said, walked in the door, said, "Here's a list of people, Tony. I don't think they're going to be here when you finish." And people do that, but I pretty much ignore it. But on hers, she wasn't good. And I could see that in an interview. And she shouldn't be a project manager in that company. She didn't have the organizational skills. But she interviewed out with some skills that they didn't have in their marketing side. And I said, this person could be the perfect person to go do the country club circuit with all the ladies and women and bring in the big jobs that way. And because they come either through the architects or buy directly from a homeowner. And they gave her a salary and a draw, and she was making $80,000 as a project manager there. And she got fired from that job because of the recommendation. And she was hired on a performance-based compensation basis to bring in construction revenue for these very, very high-end products, which are houses, but they're like beasts, actually. And she made $250,000 the first year.
Wow.
And she made $250,000 in the second year, and then left to start her own business. So but it proved the point. She had the skills. It was a needed thing in the business plan that they didn't exist. She had all the skills for it. We could get her cheap. She knows the business, and we're doing it on pure performance. So you don't have to go out and recruit it and hire and hope. So this one was a no-brainer and happened to work. I will tell you that's not the normal story, but it can happen.
So and it's just evident in working with you and even talking today why most, I would say 90, if not higher, I think 90% is a conservative estimate, but it's why most chiropractic practices don't turn into businesses. They stay as mom and pop shops, and I'm sure that's not just chiropractic, Tony. I'm sure it's dentists and medical doctors and ophthalmologists, but they never grow beyond their capacity to understand what we've just been talking about. So maybe in last question, and we'll wrap it up, and I just want to talk about one last thing, but what's a process like this? Because I'm sure it's different for different organizations, but you understand kind of the basic layout of a chiropractic practice, medical practice, dental practice. But what's a reasonable period of time to see that this closed loop system is gaining momentum and really implemented in a business?
3 months. It would take 3 months before you can really typically, once it's straightforward implement. Most chiropractic practices by far are probably the most structured. I know when I was back starting out out of college and giving speeches to the school where my brother was doing his medical school in Philadelphia, trying to teach them how to start their practices and how to start them effectively. As I went through my business in public accounting, I thought chiropractic practices even back then were the most buttoned up I'd seen as far as process within the practice. And then later on, the doctors got on board and the dentist got on board. And so I think 3 months would probably be about enough time to begin to measure change. Revenue change typically takes 6 months to a year and a half to fully implement. But you should see gains or see the things that you're looking for in leads and change occurring within 3 months. I think anything beyond that would be hope, and you don't want hope. You want to be able to modify. So I'd say in your practice, for example, I would say anything that planning on doing. As you know, I've said we're walking into the front of this year with a plan in place, period. And by March of next year, you should be rocking and rolling, I would think.
Awesome.
So that would be normal. That would be normal. It doesn't, once companies, unless they're failing, and now we're not talking about a failing company here, a company that's upside down is losing rapidly, you have to stop the bleeding first. So the first step in that is to keep the company from going out of business. So that's a triage implementation. And then you get, after you stop the bleeding, then you put in the structures. So they're the more difficult ones to do because they're inherent problems, either in the marketplace or in the ownership that are causing that.
Well, maybe we should start a new business, and because when you said initially 2 months, we could call it 8 weeks to wellness for businesses.
That would be good. We could do a joint venture.
There you go. Well, this has been great. Like I said, I know a lot of my docs will be listening to this via recording, Tony, and I would love for them to have access to you. It's just, I can't say enough about Tony and what a wonderful experience it's been. And I really feel like we're laying the structure and really, to be honest, something that we should have done a long time ago in our practice. But just being transparent, I took my eye off the ball and put my eye on 8 weeks to wellness. And I thought a lot of these things were being done but at the end of the day, guys, you need a coach, and one of the reasons I'm a big proponent of going out and getting a coach is just for the mere fact that a coach is going to hold you accountable. So if you pick the right coach, that coach is going to be holding you accountable on a weekly basis to getting the things done and getting the plan in place. As Tony said, the first thing you need to do is you need to set up the playbook. And you need to make sure that playbook is a winning playbook before you run the plays and keep score. So, not everybody knows how to set up a winning playbook. And, I would dare say in business, very few chiropractors know how to set up a winning playbook. So why not go out and, use somebody who has the playbook already and is just going to adapt it for your game. And that's really what Tony's doing for us. And I can't wait to start executing these plays and keeping score, Tony, because, at the end of the day, the one thing that I love is we have an amazing product. We're not going out and selling, pencil erasers. We're going out and selling people their life back. And, just like you've experienced, Tony, when you get your life back, you want to go out and tell everybody else. So, our playbook is a playbook that gives people their health and their life back. So,
Amen to that. I agree.
So with that, Tony, just let everybody know how they can, is there a place where I can go? I'm sharing my screen now, but is there a place that I can go where people can get more information about you via website?
Yeah, as you know, I'm just, you can go right now to the firm I'm now contractually doing business with. I was working for a firm in this area. I'd merged my practice with that firm, and I've unwound that as of this week and going back to private practice nationally, actually. And but regionally, I'm going to remain a resource for them. So right now, as these changes go over to setting up Buranno Group over the next two weeks, it can be reached at CLM Advisors, and the e-address on that is www.c as in Charlie, L as in Lady, M as in Mary, Advisors, ADVISORS.net. And that will give you some information about me, but that's really not what you want to do. Probably, if you have a question, it's free. Pick up the phone, give me a call. I will call you back and talk about what your issue is. And if you do business with me, fine. If you don't do business with me, that's okay too. But maybe I can answer and give you some direction. So the easiest way is to call, and that is area code 856-589-3100, extension 10. And I will call you back from not in the office within 24 hours typically.
So just give that number one more time, Tony.
Sure. It's area code 856-589-3100.
Okay, awesome. Extension 10. I'm showing it up on the screen right now as we speak.
And I am at extension 10.
Awesome. I got it up on the screen.
Okay.
Tony, I can't.
Great. I see it.
Can't thank you enough for your time. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to kind of share with us. And look forward to our continued relationship together, and I hope you have an awesome weekend.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.